Up next, we in fact will be having a case study on online gaming. And our next speaker is an innovation evangelist, a technology entrepreneur, and policy advisor who spent 3 decades driving digital inclusion and policy innovation. In fact, as the head and co-founder of Digital India Foundation and an adjunct professor at IIT BHU, he's made significant contributions across consumer internet, digital media, and data economy. And he's also recognized globally and has been listed amongst the global fintech top 100 influencers and is also the member of the WEF's Global Futures Council. Ladies and gentlemen, we have with us none other than Dr. Arvind Gupta, and this is all about empowering digital trust. Can we have a huge round of applause to please help me welcome our keynote speaker, Dr. Arvind Gupta. We can have a louder round of applause. I know we've been listening to a lot of information there, but let's keep that energy on. Yes, sir. Right in the center.
Thank you for having me. I was just listening to both my introduction and the panel before me, and it was interesting. We had a professor, we had a former policymaker, Mr. Maheshwari, and we had a startup person. Unfortunately, I have played all those roles and still continue to play all those roles combined. So, but one thing that came out of the discussion, and I'm going to re-emphasize that, is the fact that this is the most difficult area from a policy maker's hat or lens to regulate or do any sort of quasi-regulation. So whereas I have a few things to talk about, and I'm hoping for this thing to work. Is there some switch that I have to switch on? I'm pressing the green switch. Yeah, it worked now. Thank you. So we are seeing four mega trends in this whole gaming sector that we have right now, that you all are part of. Number one, the consumer side, which is really the fourth industrial economy, the fourth industrial revolution. Very briefly, I'll talk about that. The whole discussion around regulatory risk. So what are the thoughts on that? Third concern that overall that we have, and we see it every day, and that spoils, the bad apple spoils the lot, is the illegal operators. And of course, this issue of addiction. Somebody asked about parental controls. And I think that's generally becoming an issue. And how do we address that, especially underage? So, of course, everybody knows this. And as a person who is part of India's venture capital fund, I understand. I mean, we see the amount of investments going into both the digital infrastructure and, of course, the gaming sector. And I think to this audience, it's needless to say that we today have one of the cheapest internet in the world. So that's why you need a lot of content. Gaming is part of that. With cloud, 5G, all of that, it makes it even more complex. And of course, in last 10 years, the per capita has almost gone up double. So that gives us this whole thing of disposable income that people are spending, and they need more paths to spend. But where I am trying to focus today's discussion is this whole path to regulation, not regulation per se, but path to regulation with trust. Now, that could be a form of a quasi-regulation. Mr. Maheshwari talked about the rules that were espoused, but never are probably in work in progress still because of changing priorities, the whole concept of SROs. But you all have to understand that taxation is not the only way to regulate. And sometimes we confuse, especially in the case of cryptos, this has happened, that just because it gets taxed means there's a quasi-regulation. We have to have better even regulation, and maybe a double, triple tiered regulation in place, which can start with an SRO and some kind of other mechanisms on top of it, some government rules. But taxation is just one sort of a quasi-regulation. The government will and always will collect taxes on any service, any profits, and just the presence of taxation doesn't ensure that this means it's a regulated industry. I just want to always clear that. Two, we are talking about a lot of things in this slide, but I hardly have 10 minutes. But what is really that is happening is today, even the legal, the verified, the trusted operators have no means of saying we are trusted, we are verified, we are sharing correct information with the correct law enforcement agencies, whatever they may be, apart from the taxation angle, which is bound by taxes. If you're a legal operator, you have to pay taxes. But because of that, there is hardly any trust, speaking from a semi-government perspective, in the ecosystem. And that's why the illegal operators are making merry. And we have to understand that this is something, that the biggest concern that stems from a pure regulatory or policy perspective is this whole issue of money laundering that we are seeing off and off happening. And how do we ensure that this is something that the verified operators or legal operators are not really being subjected to? And for that, whether we work with reporting authorities, we become a reporting authority, or as I said, a quasi verified operator, I think the industry needs to look at it. That's my proposition to the industry. Second big thing is something that, as a concerned parent, I would ask, but I think there's been a lot of discussion on this. I think the industry needs to come together to do even more powerful KYCs. I think there is multiple standards, different platforms, different companies are adopting when they do what is called KYC. So strict enforcement of above 18 and below 18, and then this whole issue of even doing KYC, whether it's asked or not, but something that we have to do it proactively. And that's something I think will help a lot, because there is a lot of judicial activism happening as well as political activism happening on under 18 accounts. And I think all of us need to understand this is not something that we can brush aside as we go along. There is something, that will also do something which we did in the government when we implemented the Jan Dhan Aadhaar mobile trinity by eliminating multiple users using the same KYC. So, to game the system, as you call it, you have to ensure that you have only one account per user on a platform playing a particular game. So I think this KYC, strict KYC, end-to-end KYC process is something that we need to do. And the last thing that I want to talk about is this whole issue of the pushback you are getting is on addiction. And I think as a professor's hat, I can tell you that is where, as an industry, again, you have to come together to differentiate between consumption and addiction. And we have to balance between consumption. We have to encourage good consumption, but also make sure that, the correct behavior of addiction can be short-stopped and can be addressed. This is the tough area. If you are not going to balance between the two, the government will intervene. There is going to be a political economy that will come under pressure to intervene, and we know that this is something that is starting off now. There is a lot of demand to restrict usage, restrict the buy-ins you can do, restrict the amount of games you can play per day from a policy and regulatory perspective. And I think that is a very dangerous trend. That is a very dangerous trend because I make 100,000 rupees a month. I can probably afford to lose 5,000. Somebody who makes 10,000, 20,000 rupees cannot afford to lose 5,000. So for whom it is addiction, for whom it is consumption, it's a very, very, very nuanced thing. So we have to understand. But again, the industry has to come together. The way we have built digital public infrastructure for common KYC, common payments, there's a lot of things one can do. But for this, I will tell you something. When I was a CEO of MyGov, when we were crowdsourcing a lot of ideas for certain content regulation and others, I was part of the content committee. The industry has never spoken in a single voice. My biggest advice to industry is at least have 70-80% unanimity. Nobody will ever get 100% unanimity, but at least have some common unanimity, common minimum program. Political parties work on common minimum program. I think as an industry we can speak in singular voice. This is a very important issue. To protect the industry, you all need to come together and understand how do we do this, what kind of layered third-party public infrastructure we can have to really address issues of addiction, that people should not just leave one game and go and play another, and every platform is managing their own time, but as a joint, it is still passing 10 hours or whatever hours that are much above the limit. So that's a limited point I have. And lastly, I think because we're talking about trust, I have done a lot of work on trust. We have, very high amount of research today, trust in platforms. And my submission to all of you as somebody who thinks of startups, who are building your own startups, or maybe handling policy within startups, is to think about trust as a distributed ecosystem. You have consumer trust, you have policymakers trust, and you have the trust of the ecosystem around you, the complementers. And I think when we see trust from a singular lens of only policymakers or consumers, that it's also incomplete. So start looking at trust in a distributed ecosystem, because that will help you solve this problem of trust rather than just concentrating on one single lens. And that's the last thing I would say. It's perfectly timed. My time is over. So thank you very much. I just wanted to come here and talk to you, in your convention that you put together every year on this whole issue of trust, regulation, addiction, KYC, and what are the kind of things you could do or think about. Because I do wear multiple hats, and if I wear a hat of a startup entrepreneur, which I was 15 years ago, sitting on your side of the table, I think one thing is for sure. We always used to say there are four P's in marketing, but now there is the biggest fifth P, which is policy. So it's no longer product, price, place, promotion. Policy will disrupt everything, and large or big startups, large or big companies have seen that. So make sure that before you get disrupted by policy, you are prepared for it better. Thank you very much.